All right, let's do this, you and me. Let's get into the question that has been riveting the nation this week since Special Counsel Mueller finished his probe on Friday. How does this end? Comedians have started saying the punchline is that all of this is really confusing.
All I know is I haven't been this confused about an ending since the series finale of Lost. I don't know. It's kind of funny, though. Half of America is upset that our president didn't collude with Russia. Seems like we should probably be happy about that, shouldn't we?
Kimmel captures 2 points there. It is a good thing for America that there was no chargeable election conspiracy. And yes, for some, things may seem confusing. This is actually way more opaque than the show Lost. If Mueller's report is the season finale to Lost, then Bill Barr's letter is like the TiVo description of Lost last episode. And how confusing would that be? Which goes to the most important thing about understanding Mueller's findings. We don't have them yet. But like any special counsel probe, we've always known there are two main legal mechanisms to assess what Mueller found. Indictments, which show where there was evidence enough to charge people criminally, and the Mueller report. Now, tonight, as of this moment, outside of DOJ, people have only one of these things so far, the indictments. Now, they reveal everything Mueller found that he could criminally charge. So when the probe ended Friday, we knew anything that had not been charged was not getting charged by Mueller. And that's a point we reported up front Friday and throughout this busy weekend for legal news. He did not find chargeable collusion conspiracy. There was not a collusion election conspiracy. It's time to acknowledge there's no chargeable collusion. That was all weekend, and that was good news for Trump and for the nation, and we know that from the indictments. It also undercuts Trump critics who were insisting there was maybe a collusion conspiracy before the criminal evidence was in. It does not legally undercut any of the previous extensive work done by Mueller, who busted a crime spree by Trump advisors, ranging from Trump's lawyer and top campaign officials to his longest-serving political advisor. Mueller's so effective, his work has already resulted in Trump having the highest rate of indictments for his aides than any president ever. This fact coexists with no chargeable conspiracy. So the crimes charged on your screen are a reminder of why it's odd for Trump fans to celebrate a lot about the probe this week. Trump busted for hiring more crooks than most presidents ever do in 2 full terms. And that's just the American side. Mueller also indicting 12 Russians, exposing tactics both for accountability and to educate the public, an operation that the sitting president would still go on to deny. So if you take what we know from the indictments, there are still these major questions that remain, that are mysterious, like why so many lies if there was no conspiracy?
Why would Donald Trump lie about Russia? What was the press to report on when all of these lies were tumbling out of the mouths of all of these Trump aides? They lied about the Russians nonstop for 2 years.
Nonstop lies, according to one of my colleagues there, and he makes a very good point. Mueller's finished, so it makes you want to ask these people around Trump, why were you lying? I did that exact thing. I asked that question when we had the first person ever convicted in the Mueller probe on, George Papadopoulos, last night for his first MSNBC appearance ever. Do you understand why people watching this find this to be hard to believe you? Because during the probe, you were downplaying all these Russian contacts. Now there's no chargeable collusion, and people are thinking, why did you play it down?
I tried to explain it. I was trying to distance myself from my, I guess, stupid activities, and I didn't want to involve other people.
Okay. For some lower-level people, the lies were to cover their, quote, stupid activities and mistakes, or try to keep their bosses out of it. That's some people. For other Trump associates, lying to the government seemed second nature. When I pressed Mueller witness Jerome Corsi about his original plan to help Roger Stone mislead Congress, he admitted their original attempt. They were going to lie. And he said he ultimately told Mueller's investigators the truth about that lie. How did they react to this other defense that you made on behalf of Roger Stone, which is you agreed to help Roger mislead Congress about how he found out about Podesta.
Well, see, in fact, that was the first. There's 2 rounds of this that I went through. Round 1, I openly discussed that with him and admitted it all because it was true. I was telling him the truth.
You were telling him the truth about a lie?
No. Well, okay, so yes.
Yes, he admitted to lying. Then there are the more senior Trump advisors convicted of obstruction crimes like lying to investigators or Congress, which were linked to cover-ups related to Trump. Think of Cohen or Manafort. Michael Cohen lying to Congress about things that weren't indicted in this probe, such as how he and candidate Trump sought business in Moscow and lied to the public about it right during the campaign. Cohen also misled I should say, the public about things that were crimes. Michael Cohen misled the public about what he later confessed to, a campaign finance crime. Now, until we see the Mueller report, we don't know what Mueller found about other things that people may have tried to cover up, again, separate from what we do know, which is no chargeable conspiracy. For example, what drove Trump's glowing embrace of Putin in Helsinki, backing up Putin's denials for the evidence of meddling that Mueller was showing in these indictments? What drove Trump to brief top Russian officials about firing James Comey when they had their weird Oval Office meeting with no U.S. press? Or why did Trump personally dictate the statement that misled the public about the infamous Trump Tower meeting? Those things sound like potential evidence of obstruction of justice, because those things are potential evidence of obstruction of justice. Trump's own attorney general concedes they are evidence of potential obstruction of justice, because in the very little that he did release about Mueller's report, he still told the world, A, Mueller included evidence of obstruction against Trump, and B, Mueller concluded in writing that Trump was not exonerated on obstruction. So to repeat the legal situation we are in, based on what we know, this week, no chargeable conspiracy, open case on obstruction. A former prosecutor who Trump tried to cultivate in his home jurisdiction of SDNY, Preet Bharara, he cites this record to note that Mueller clearly found substantial evidence of obstruction.
With respect to the second part of the Mueller report on obstruction, I think that's where there's some troublesome language in the letter. It's clear that Bob Mueller found substantial evidence of obstruction. Almost by definition, there's substantial evidence. If you think it's such a close question, you can't make a decision about whether or not the president committed a crime. Bob Mueller made it clear to say this does not exonerate the president. So that raises a lot of questions.
Substantial evidence, like Trump pressing Comey not to investigate Mike Flynn, who later confessed to a crime. Like Trump firing Comey with a written false reason, then Trump confessing the real reason was Russia. Like Trump attacking Comey's replacement McCabe and driving him out of the DOJ, or Trump attacking Mueller's entire probe, or discouraging people from cooperating with law enforcement, or calling them rats, or praising criminal defendants who didn't testify honestly, or talking up the pardon power in the middle of the probe, or asking White House staff to fire Bob Mueller, something Nixon famously tried as well. People do jail time for far less than that. Ask Michael Cohen, or ask Paul Manafort, in whichever jurisdiction you want. So the special counsel already probed that and uncovered other secret obstruction evidence and wrote it up in this report. Anyone telling you they have a view of that evidence without access to the report is not worth listening to. That includes Trump defenders who are already claiming an exoneration on obstruction that they didn't get, even according to Trump's own attorney general. But it also includes Trump critics claiming they know that Mueller threw the book at Trump in the obstruction case, or they know how it should end. Now, I've heard some people say this part can be confusing. That's one way to put it. Another way to put it is you just can't write a book report for a book you haven't read. So these remaining holes and questions are not a confusing defect in this process. They are the process until Congress sees the report. So before Friday, no matter what was charged or not charged on conspiracy, let's just have some real talk. It's not like legal experts were waiting around to study a few partial selective quotes from the report. And no one ever even knew Barr would take this approach to selective quoting. Now, Barr can lawfully do that. As I've mentioned in our reporting throughout, like it or not, the Attorney General can share his views with Congress and the public, and everyone can see them, and his views matter. He's the Attorney General. He oversees the special counsel probe. But for learning what Mueller found over his 22-month investigation, again, there are these two sources, the indictments and the report. Not the indictments, the report, and a weekend letter from a Trump appointee. It's the indictments and the report, period. So the theme this week doesn't actually have to be confusing. I think it's more like waiting for the report. And the bottom line here is that with Mueller ending the probe with the 37 indictments, he closed the door on a chargeable conspiracy. And as I've noted during the whirlwind of news since Friday, I'll say it again because I do think some things are worth repeating. In an era when there's so much talk about who should stand up for facts or principles regardless of political pressure, a sentiment often aimed these days, understandably, at congressional Republicans, this is a time for people to acknowledge no chargeable conspiracy, even if that doesn't agree with a given political angle or sentiment. It's a time to acknowledge Mueller's findings and analysis on obstruction also can only be assessed when we get them, which is why this is actually clearer than the season finale of Lost. Maybe it's a little bit more like a great line from the Social Network movie, where the Facebook founder character says, if you were the inventor of Facebook, you would have invented Facebook. There was no chargeable conspiracy, and on obstruction, the way to understand Mueller's findings is to wait until we see Mueller's findings. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.